Double down. 3 opponents down. You have zone advantage. Double down.
Ladies and gents, my name is Xander, aka Deislayers, and in this video, we're gonna really dive deep into finding out as to which one of this family of hand cannons, aka the Rose versus the Lumina versus the Thorn, and find out which one of these 3 beauties is truly the best among the 3, at least in terms of PvP. Now some of you might be asking, well, why is this considered a quote-unquote family of hand cannons? To you I say, this is all about the weapon's lore, and actually, the Rose is the base hand cannon among the 3, and then eventually what happened is that 2 different guardians, one with light and one with darkness, then turned the weapons into their exotic forms with the light, aka the Lumina, and the darkness via the Thorn. If it wasn't already obvious as to why we had to do a comparison between these 3 hand cannons, it's also because of you, my friends. And so as you guys can see from right there, we had so many guardians asking for this exact same style of video, but not just this. I also did a poll on YouTube as well as Twitter to find out as to which one of these 3 things that you guys actually thought was the best. Luckily for all of us, all these weapons are now in Bungie's API, and that then means that we can look at all these weapons base stats, do a side-by-side comparison analysis, but in addition to this, I want to look at the weapons TTK stats, how their perks are then going to affect those things, and most importantly about all this stuff, I really want to go into private matches and test 4 things. Number 1, their effective range. Number 2, their bullet magnetism. Number 3, their recoil directions. And number 4, arguably the most vital out of all these things, is the weapons bloom and how it's going to affect each of them. The only thing left to do is to simply sit back, relax, grab a bag of popcorn, and eviscerate that notification button, and let's jump right into the video. Whenever I do comparison analysis like this, I think it's very important for you guys to grasp and comprehend as to how they're going to function, at least in terms of the weapons TTK. But before I can even get into any of that stuff, what you have to understand about all these things is that they are partially exotic and legendary weapons, and so I really want to kind of give you the weapons pros and cons based upon those things, and that is via the weapons perks first. Right off the bat, we got the Rose, and the Rose has polymer grip, outlaw, accurized rounds, chambered compensator, a range masterwork, and a backup mag mod. Upon first inspection, you might not think that anything is too special there, but we're going to get into this in a little bit. So next up we happen to have the Lumina perks, and this thing has polymer grip, blessing of the sky, accurized rounds, chambered compensator, and noble rounds. What I want to focus on here is noble rounds first, and it states that kills with this weapon leave behind remnants. Absorbing a remnant converts your next hit-fired shot into an ally-seeking noble round and partially refills the magazine. This perk in and of itself really doesn't do too much, but when you pair it with Blessing of the Sky, that perk then happens to state that using a noble round on an ally heals them and grants both you and them a weapon damage bonus for a short duration. Don't worry, I'll explain how all this stuff functions in just a few seconds, but before I do so, we gotta get into the Thorn and its unique perks. And so as you guys can tell from right there, it's got textured grip, Soul Devourer, accurized rounds, corkscrew rifling, and Mark of the Devourer. With Mark of the Devourer, that perk states that rounds pierce targets and deal damage over time, aka a DOT effect. Kills with this weapon leave behind remnants just the same way that noble rounds does on the Lumina. But once again, this perk in and of itself really isn't that great, but what really makes it special is that Soul Devourer perk, and this perk states that absorbing a remnant strengthens Mark of the Devourer and partially refills the magazine. In hearing how all these perks work, there's 2 main things that I want you guys to take away from this. One's a similarity and one's a difference. The first similarity is that both the Lumina and the Thorn are going to leave behind remnants as soon as they happen to kill one guardian. And not just this, but when you happen to absorb that remnant, each one of them is going to reload the magazine by 4. As far as my second point goes, this is all dealing with the weapon's differences. And the main thing that I want you guys to take away from this is that the Lumina is defined as a support weapon, whereas the Thorn is defined as an attack weapon, pure and simple. How we're going to see this is with the weapons TTK stats. And so as you guys can see from right here, here's all the weapons TTK stats. And the main thing that I want you guys to take away from this is that both the Rose and the Lumina have the exact same TTKs at least in terms of their base stats. But when it comes to the Thorn, it's a little bit different, so let me explain this. Both the Rose and the Lumina have an optimal TTK at 0.8 seconds and a body shot TTK at 1.6 seconds. But the Thorn, it's then going to have an optimal TTK at 0.8 seconds with an additional 1.2 seconds due to that DOT effect, and it can do so with 2 crits in one body and a Guardian who only happens to have 5 resilience. That right there is a colossal distinction, because as soon as a Guardian happens to go up to 6 resilience, you're no longer going to be able to simply 2 crit them and 1 body them, and rather the weapon's then going to have 3 critical headshots to still down them. And if this is the case, the optimal TTK is actually going to be the exact same as the Rose and the Lumina at 0.8 seconds without any kind of extra DOT effect, because you're not going to have to worry about that since its damage output is already high enough to just simply 3 crit them. The only other thing that I want to mention here is that with the critical damage output and body shot damage of the Rose and the Lumina, that's both at 68 and 43 respectively. But the Thorn is also doing this with an additional 2x4. And that's because the weapon does 4 ticks of 2 damage, and that's why you see the additional 2x4 both on the weapon's critical damage output and body shot respectively. Now I know I said a lot of stuff right there in a very short amount of time, and so there's one main thing that I really want you guys to take away from this, and that is that the Rose, the Lumina, and the Thorn can still have the exact same optimal TTK at 0.8 seconds if each of them happens to land 3 critical headshots. This can be achievable for any Guardian at any resilience, and that is something significant. But what you might also be thinking to yourself is, okay, well, what makes the Lumina and the Thorn quote-unquote exotic, at least in terms of the weapon's TTK factors? To you I say, this, my friends, is a marvelous and spectacular and wonderful question, and so just to kind of sum everything up once again, here's all the information right there on screen. On the left, we had the Rose with its base TTK stats because it's not going to get a buff in any way, shape, or form. But with the Lumina and the Thorn, those are going to get stats via their Blessing of the Sky perk and also the Soul Devourer perk. With the Lumina, its optimal TTK is still at 0.8 seconds, but it can achieve this with 2 crits in one body, doing critical damage output at 81 points of damage and body shot damage at 51. With the Thorn, this is once again where things get a little bit tricky, and this is because it can now do 68 points of damage plus an additional 7x4, and that's with the increase in damage due to the DOT effect. And when you're taking this into account, the weapon can 2 crit somebody with a Guardian F5 resilience, but also keep in mind that it's going to take an additional 0.4 seconds just to fire the 2 shots, and then on top of this, an additional 1.2 seconds to actually take into account for that DOT effect. Once again, I repeat that this is with a Guardian at 5 resilience, and as soon as it happens to go up to 6 resilience, that's when the Soul Devourer perk can no longer 2-shot anybody. And so to you I say, I think it's still very, very advantageous for you to still land that 1 extra shot via a crit or a body, as that's then going to ensure that the enemy Guardian is going to be sent to the afterlife and their soul is going to meet Anubis himself. In seeing and hearing all this kind of information, I think it's a fair assessment to say that Bungie actually did a very, very good job in balancing these 3 weapons and making them similar but yet at the same time not too overpowered, all while making them very, very unique and simultaneously giving them a wide variety of playstyles for a wide variety of different Guardians. Now the next question that you might be asking yourselves is, okay, well, which one of these 3 things is going to fit my playstyle the best? And I think that the way in which we can really answer this is by looking at the weapon's base stats. Finally, Bungie has actually updated their API, and thus we can see all these weapons base stats right there on screen. And notably, I want you to just simply take into account that all the blue values are due to increases via the weapon's perks, while all the black values are the weapon's base stats themselves. And so what I really want you guys to take away from this is that the Rose actually has the best range out of all of them at 64, whereas the Lumina has a range at 54, and the Thorn has a range at 55. Last but not least, we have all these weapons, aim assistance, and the recoil directions. And so if you were to ask me, this is really what was surprising amongst all these base stats, because I really thought that the Lumina actually had the worst aim assistance, but in reality it has the best at 88, followed by the Rose and the Thorn's aim assistance at 85. But following this, we then had the weapon's recoil directions, and all of these are superb. And just as an FYI, it's not going to overstack, so in reality, even though the Rose and the Lumina both have technically 105 recoil directions, That's going to top out at 100, just the same way that the Thorns is also topping out at 100. With that, I think that you now kind of have a very good understanding as to how the weapon's base stats are then going to give either the Rose, the Lumina, or the Thorn an advantage over the other. But what you don't know is that most of the time, a weapon's recoil direction, their aim assistance, and their stability factors really cater to the weapon's shot rhythm. And in all honesty, these are almost the same across the board, and the only difference between all of these three stats is only by 3. And so to that you might be thinking, okay, well, how are these things really differing then? The answer to that question is with the weapon's range, because range not only affects the weapon's damage falloff, but on top of this, it also affects the weapon's bullet magnetism. And so these two things are actually what we're going to go test this very second in private matches. Right now, I'm taking out my Darcy. I'm simply measuring 28 meters. As soon as I do so, I then take the Rose, and we can see that this thing's then doing 68 points damage per crit, followed by the Lumina doing the exact same thing, and once again followed by the Thorn doing precisely the same thing. Yet again, I'm taking out that Darcy to measure out 29 meters, and with this one we happen to see that the Rose is still doing 68 points of damage per crit, but the Lumina then goes down to 66, and following that the Thorn then goes down to 67. Summing all this up, we're taking out the Darcy one last time to just simply test the Rose at 30 meters, and right there we can then see that this thing then did 67 points of damage per crit. In summation, the Rose's maximum range value is at 29 meters, whereas the Lumina and the Thorn is at 28 meters. And this is once again reaffirmed by the fact that the weapon via the Rose and its range happens to be at 64, followed by the Lumina at 54 and the Thorn at 55. However, there is one other huge significant thing that we simply cannot ignore, and that is the weapon's bullet magnetism. And once again, range is affecting these things. And so to test this, what I'm doing is once again going into those private matches, line up that 15 meter distance with the Darcy, and testing the Rose first. Throughout all these cases, via the Rose, Lumina, and Thorn, I'm shooting on the right hand side of the head first, and then on the top side of the head next. And the reason why this is significant is because the weapon's recoil directions, and you'll see those in just a couple of minutes as well. But for right now, we can tell that the Rose is doing awesome in every single category and can miss by a marginal difference both on the right hand side of the head and the top of the head. As far as the Lumina goes, it's not doing quite as well as what the Rose did, but it's still doing very good on the right hand side of the head, and it's doing just as good as what the Rose did on the top side of the head. But then when we go into the Thorn, this is where things actually surprised me drastically, because the Thorn, at least on the right hand side of the head, was doing muff cabbage trash shenanigans and truly despicable. But on the top side of the head, it was just doing okay and really didn't surprise me, and actually quite what I was expecting. Now that you guys have seen that, we're doing all these test cases yet again, but the difference here is at 30 meters. And the reason why we're doing this is because hand cannons function very differently in the engagements in which they're meant to be utilized in. And for the vast majority of cases, they're going to be used in this 28 to 30 meter range. With the Rose, what you guys just saw should blow your mind and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I just saw that, and it's absolutely a definition of astonishing. Because even on the right hand side of the shoulder, I was still able to miss by a drastic margin, and even more so on the top side of the head, all the way to the point that I was actually shooting above the health bar. On the other hand, we had the Lumina, and it didn't perform nearly as well as what the Rose did on the right hand side of the head, but did almost just as good as what the Rose did on the top side of the head. And then when we do these things once again with the Thorn, we get completely different results. On the right hand side of the head, that's when it actually performed better than the Lumina, but on the top side of the head, it still did quite as good as what the Rose did, and that right there is some very key differences between all three of these things. In essence, what I want you guys to take away from this is that hands down the Rose is the clear winner here at 15 meters and 30 meters, at least in terms of the weapon's bullet magnetism. Because this thing could obviously miss by a drastic, out of this world, mind-boggling conclusion, but with the Lumina and the Thorn, it wasn't quite nearly as good as what the Rose was, yet at the same time, the Lumina actually did better on the right hand side of the head at 15 meters, whereas the Thorn did better at 30 meters, vice versa. Now the reason why those things that I just said are so pivotal to understand is because of each one of these weapons' recoil directions. And also keep in mind the environments in which all these things are meant to be utilized in, aka that 20 meter to 30 meter range. As you guys can tell from right here, we happen to have the Rose going first. and its recoil direction is slightly to the right and then almost vertical after that, and thus we can tell that this thing clearly has a recoil direction at 100 out of 100. Up next is the Lumina, and with this thing we can obviously tell that it's got almost a constant and continuous 1 o'clock direction, and that then means that it might not be so good in those longer range distances, but it might be better in the close range distances. Following this is the Thorn, and as you guys can tell from right there, this thing's recoil direction is almost vertical the entire time, and that then entails that it's going to be very good for those longer range distances and laying shots on the top side of the head, but on the right hand side of the head, maybe not so much. And so this is why I really wanted you guys to grasp all these things, because depending on the way in which you fire the weapon, via pacing your shots or spamming your shots or doing something in between, these things are really going to then come into effect as to how consistently that you can land your shots. However, I think that there is actually something even more vital for you guys to comprehend that's going to allow you to send so many Guardians to the Shadow Realm, becoming an Edition God card, and that might just so happen to be with the weapon's bloom. The way in which we can see this is by looking at the weapon's reticle when we're hip firing. And so as you guys can tell from right here, here's all the real-time reactions of the Rose, the Lumina, and the Thorn respectively, which really can't kind of get a good sense as to how these things are functioning, at least in terms of the weapon's reticle and how big that it's getting via this real time. So what I want to do next is I want to do this exact same thing and show it to you in slow motion. With every single one of these shots, I want you to focus in on the weapon's reticles, specifically those little sticks that are actually going in and out of the inner circle, as that's then going to dictate as to how much bloom that each one of these shots has per bullet. First up, we have the Rose, and as you can tell from right here, it's doing quite well, especially in that first and second bullet, and maybe even into that third bullet, but then as soon as it happens to get outside that, that's when we see a massive bloom effect in the weapon's fourth and fifth bullet. As we go into the Lumina, it's not doing quite as well as what the Rose does, but still on that first and second shot, it's still doing pretty good. But when it gets to that third, fourth, and fifth shot, that's when those little ticks are going far outside the circle and having colossal bloom effects. Inspecting the Thorn next, we can see that once again, its first and second shot is doing very good, and maybe that third shot as well, but as soon as it happens to get to that fourth and fifth shot, that's when once again, it's doing despicable, at least in terms of the weapon's bloom. The main premise that I want you to take away from this is that the Rose is the obvious winner here, and this is why it feels as if the weapon is more consistent, because its bloom effect is that much more less, and it can have significant less bloom up until that fourth bullet. What this then means to you is that what you can do with the Rose is you can still miss one shot and still not have the after effects of bloom or as much bloom as what you might have on that fourth shot. With the Lumina, this is the exact opposite, because as soon as you happen to miss one of those shots, that's when bloom is really going to come into effect, especially within that third, fourth, and fifth bullet afterwards. And maybe with the Thorn, you might be able to get away with it here or there, as I found that with the Thorn, it could potentially get that third bullet to still be able to have less bloom, but once again, as soon as you get to that fourth and certainly the fifth bullet, bloom is going to have a significant effect on this one just as well as what it does with the Lumina. The next question that we have to ask ourselves is which one of these three beauties is truly the best among the three? If you were to ask me, I'm going to categorize this by three things. Number 1, consistency, number 2, lethality, and number 3, versatility. As far as consistency goes, the Rose is 110% the winner in this category, and that's because one thing and one thing alone, the weapon's bloom. It has much less bloom than that of the other hand cannons, and then when you incorporate the fact that it can actually have a better range factor than the other ones as well, that's then going to dictate that it can be used at larger distances and once again become more consistent. The second category that I mentioned was lethality, and hands down the most lethal weapon out of all these three is the Thorn, and that's because its DOT effect is not only going to potentially kill them even if you only happen to land 2 bullets, as that's ridiculous all in of itself, but not just this, it's going to prevent enemy Guardians from regaining their health, and that right there is a beautiful thing. The only other category that I haven't mentioned yet, and is certainly used for categorizing as to which one is the best, is versatility. And there is no doubt in my mind that the one winner here is the Lumina. This thing can not only heal your ally, but at the same time can give both you a damage buff, and this then in turn means that with that extra damage buff, the weapon's actually then going to have more range aspects because it's doing more damage itself. No matter which one of these three beautiful beasts that you guys want to use, I think it's safe to say that all of them are gonna make enemy guardians a little bit salty. But not just that, they're also going to eradicate, obliterate, and decimate guardians given the right situations and the way in which you want to utilize them. Let me know what you guys are doing down in the comment section below, and whether or not you agree with my assessment or you don't, you think I'm full of shenanigans, or you think that I'm right on point. No matter what you guys say, I'm always going to respect your opinion, and that's something I can guarantee. Lastly, be sure to watch the newest, check the latest, and share, comment, like on social media, because you are the greatest. That's pretty much all I've got for you as of right now, Deislayers. And as always, GG TNT.